All right, my last article here. So this is from Accountancy Edge, and it says the title of the article is "New Research Reveals Fear and Control the Biggest Blockers to Automation." And so this is an article referencing a new research published this week, May. This is May 28th. So this is a COVID relatively new article and published findings. And it was a 30-minute interview conducted with more than 100 UK accountancy leaders to provide the most up-to-date analysis on technology and business changes affecting the industry. So basically, the TLDR on this one is recognizing the urgent need to automate. So often the accountants that are working with businesses and other accounting firms is they're talking about how digital is not just compliance and the impact of the coronavirus has driven this need, but often their clients are stuck in a way of doing business they've been doing for 20, 30 years. And there's a real reluctance to making that switch to automate some things, go, kind of digital with some more things. And that the fear and the control, losing control or not knowing the process inward and outward like they had been with their traditional ways of doing things, kind of stops them in their tracks from doing so. And so I thought it was an interesting touch point because the other portion that it says accountants shouldn't wait for clients to become comfortable with change. They need to push for these kind of automation and digitization of business models and business plans and business operations, that we need to push for that change to our clients and push for that change in our firms. And I'm just wondering, that creates a lot of pushback and you probably could lose clients over that, where they just feel pushed into something. I guess, do you agree with the article, or do you think that, a combination of that, or do you really think that, like, if somebody hasn't gotten on this digitization, automation, and remote workflow, that they probably are not a good client to keep? So I'm just wondering your guys' perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot baked into this. Some of which I agree with, some of which I don't. But there's a relationship to that topic and the topic of how you actually bill your clients. Because if you bill your clients, if the kind of service you provide is that you bill your clients by the hour, right? You essentially bill by the hour, and maybe even do a fixed fee, but it's based on estimated hours. And you've been doing something with your client for a decade or more, and it's an outdated way of doing things, but it's the way the client likes to do it. It's not super efficient. The truth about our business is that why would you, as the accounting firm, why would you care, right? You would just live with, the business proposition there is you live with the inefficiency because you're getting paid to work through it anyway, right? In that circumstance. Now, the risk when you do that is that some young punk comes in and is able to better explain to the client why and how they could be saving money and time by doing things in a more automated way, and then they steal your lunch, right? And that's your risk in that kind of scenario, is that if you just go with the flow, it's really, the reason you're going with the flow is kind of twofold. One is it's a hassle to get the client to move because they're not predisposed to it. And secondarily, it actually doesn't benefit you, or it doesn't obviously benefit you in the short term economically, because you're getting paid to work through that excessive process anyway. And so I think that's an undertone to some of what that article was talking about, that leads to just keeping on. And so your obvious risk there, like I said, is that young punk who comes in and turns it on its head and is able to better articulate how change saves the client time and money, and takes the business because you didn't make that case to them, right? I think there's a different nuance going on in this discussion, though, and that relates to this idea that I don't make these same connections, and this could like drive us into a whole nother topic, guys. So you'll probably have to cut me off, but there's this constant theme in our industry right now about trying to connect the power of automation in accounting work to value billing. And the story goes something like this. If you were charging your client $2,000 a month to run their accounting process, and you're doing it in an old school way, that $2,000 was based on the time and effort to do it in an old school way. it's in your interest then to automate the process and get to a more efficient process, because if you're value billing, you can still bill them $2,000 a month, but you're going to spend far less time because you've automated things. You've made efficiencies on your side that make you more profitable as the accountant, because they're used to paying you this $2,000 a month because that's the established value for that service. Okay, here's what I don't totally, I think that game only works in the short run though, right? Because the truth is that if we can all do this, you're in that scenario, you're still at risk of the young punk coming in, right? If you sit there and convince your client that they still need to pay $2,000 because that's the value of the service, and they either know or don't even know that on the back end you've made this more efficient for yourself, and so it actually costs you a lot less, you have a much higher profit margin. Hey, I'm not disagreeing all firms should do this as much as possible because that's how we do better as business people ourselves. I'm totally on that page, but I think accountants are trying to divorce themselves from the laws of economics when they preach this as the path to nirvana, because obviously if you can do that, some young punk can also do it, and then they're going to come in at a lower price because there is a bigger margin there. They can drop the price and they can take the business from you. So you still have that risk if that's your game plan, in my opinion. So it's I believe in automation. I believe in it from a professional standpoint of it's our duty to try to convince our clients of why it's better for them. I'm not such a big believer in the idea that I can set a value based on old school prices and then keep it forevermore, as automation makes the job less expensive on my end, because that's not how markets work. And what we know is that other accountants are doing the same thing and they're going to come in at lower prices. And as automation makes things less expensive to do, it's going to also mean that we get less fees for doing them. And I think that the accountants who don't want to accept that point are truly fooling themselves.
Well, and I think, to your point, Ty, I think one of the things that that maybe you didn't articulate in what you were talking about is the opportunity cost. And the opportunity cost to an accountant when they sell that automated, or they transition that client to an automated feature and you're still billing the same amount, you better go in with both eyes open and realize that client is now ripe for somebody at a lower cost to come in and take that. So what do you do with that, opportunity cost that you've afforded yourself, literally time on your schedule? Do you sit back and watch the cash roll in? Or now do you try to build your book of business to fill those extra hours so that not only are you making more money on the front end, but when somebody comes in and undercuts you, you have clients to prop up the rest of it. And I think it's something, this is not just for accountants. I saw this in the home building industry where when the business was booming, people were making hundreds of $1,000s a year and they weren't reinvesting it in their business, and they were just allowing the business, they were just literally sitting back and watching the cash roll in. But then in low times, and the housing market is very volatile, they found themselves with no clients. They found themselves with no savings. And so I think the same kind of mindset needs to happen with accountants if you're going to continue down that path, where you're not going to adjust your prices. You need to then set yourself up for success at the other end with more clients and more opportunity available to yourself to expand your business.
Yeah, totally. And I think that the other thing that kind of a common misconception that business owners can do here, or other accountants or whoever's looking at the benefit of automation, is that they can look at it as and say, okay, well, if I can automate something and then get away with billing what I normally bill, even though I save some time, maybe the amount I should be working with in my math is a couple of months of revenue because that's how long I think I can do it. But the important thing to think about is that it's the lifetime value of that customer, because if that customer decides 6 months after you've done this automation that he figures out that you've done that because, like you said, some young punk shows up, then maybe the answer is he doesn't stop, he stops using your service forever. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that when you do that, you're kind of gambling with whatever the value is of that customer over their lifetime, potentially.
Yeah. And since I'm on this, I just can't help myself. I've got to share why this story gets even worse, because it doesn't even have to be that the young punko shows up. Here's the other variant of the story. The other variant of the story is when you see people in our industry combining this topic with, And as accountants, you should get into doing more advisory services. And here's how you do it. And so the way they tell the story on this one is there is no young punk. In the story, what they do is they say, look, you've been doing compliance-oriented work, bookkeeping and things that can be more automated. And you've been charging, say, $2,000 a month. So that becomes your budget. But because you're so inefficient and you don't automate, you spend that entire $2,000 on doing work that's not advisory of nature. So here's what you should do. Here's the advice that CPAs and accountants are being given. Here's what you should do as a service provider. You should automate all of that stuff. Keep your fee at the $2,000 a month. So now you're spending less time on the bookkeeping and the stuff, the basic ministerial type work. And now you've got this bigger margin. And now, because you've got more fee for less work, you should now use that margin to provide extra advisory services for your client. And so now you've got more time to spend with your client because your average rate per hour in this theory stays the same, right? You're spending less time on bookkeeping or tax prep or whatever compliance type of thing you do. But because you're automating things, you have more time within your budget. So now you should spend those extra hours on providing advisory to your client, which is what really they value, and therefore you're going to be the hero, and so on. Well, here's the thing. In that case, you don't even need the young punk, because here's the truth from my perspective. The client doesn't actually value your advice, or they would have already engaged you separately for it and paid you for it separately from the compliance work you were doing. So you think you're going to like sneak in the advice for under the same fee. And now, I mean, I don't understand that thought process, because what's really going to happen is the client's going to scratch their head and realize, hey, for the $2,000 a month that I'm paying, you now are doing a whole bunch of stuff, some of which I wanted you to do, some of which I never cared about. So there's more stuff going on here for the same $2,000. I think the logical conclusion for the client is, why do I still have to pay $2,000 a month to get this other stuff I never cared about to begin with? Again, this comes back to the point, so you don't even need the young punk. You've already done it to yourself. You've already shown the client that you have this extra margin in there where you can just screw around on things they don't care about. And I know that's tough for accountants to hear, because we look at this and we're like, they should care about it. This advice that we're going to give them is really important. It's the value-added stuff. It's what they need to care about. But what we have to accept, and I preach to myself on this too, because this is hard for me to hear, but we have to accept that people want what they want, not necessarily what they need. So we consider as accountants and say, well, they need that advice. Well, it doesn't matter if they need it, it's what they want. And here's the truth about markets. If they actually wanted that, they would have already been buying it from you separately. They don't need you to be more efficient on the fee they're already paying you to then give them something they already didn't buy from you to begin with, right? That's like, that's like you walk into the 7-Eleven and you're like, well, I only have $5 to spend, and you say, well, I'm going to buy, all I can buy with that $5 is a couple Slurpees and a couple hot dogs, and I don't know if that'll cover both of those, but I'm just thinking $5, maybe covers a couple Slurpees and a couple hot dogs. And then you walk in the next day and the person at the counter says, well, we've lowered the price on Slurpees and hot dogs, so now for that $5, let us give you the Slurpees, the hot dogs, and the nachos. Okay. You'll take it, but you didn't buy the nachos to begin with, right? You didn't go make more money to run into the 7-Eleven to buy an extra set of nachos to begin with. And you didn't choose nachos ahead of the Slurpees or the hot dogs. So the nachos were never really that valuable to you to begin with, right? I think this is just market. This is about market and demand. And I think accountants are just terrible at thinking through those things. And so we've convinced ourselves, this is such groupthink in our profession right now, this idea that we're going to force advisory services on clients by being more efficient with the compliance work that they actually want to pay us for.
I think it goes back to something that we've preached on this podcast for a long time, that as an accountant, when you're selling, you really need to show the value you're giving to a client. But not only that, the client needs to know the value that they're getting and want it. because it doesn't do you any good to sell something that they don't want or provide something that they don't want. I mean, I've seen it in my profession when you would do something above and beyond for somebody and they're like, great, but why? Like,
That's right. That's right.
know?
Yeah.
That.
And just to clarify, I'm not preaching that you shouldn't, as an accountant, you shouldn't seek to do advisory services. I'm not preaching that. I'm not preaching that you shouldn't be more of an advisor than a compliance accountant. That is what we seek to do as well. But we don't confuse the two things, right? We do advisory services. That's what our firm does, but we sell them as advisory services. We don't sell the compliance services and then try to be efficient on the compliance and then sneak the advisory services in. I mean, what kind of crazy thought process is that? We look for people who actually want to buy the advisory services and we sell it to them, not to the people who don't want to buy it and try to sneak it in on them.
I think often as accountant professionals, we often think one size fits all. So here's our fee and here's what you're going to get. You know, it's like the old Model T. What color does it come in? Oh, it comes in any color you want as long as it's black. You know, it's like, well, okay, you know, like, wouldn't it be better? I mean, I used to have the same complaint about cable TV. I don't watch baby TV. I don't watch, Animal Planet. Can I just get sports, local channels, and something else? Can I just pay for those 5 channels? No. You got to buy the 32 channel package if you want to watch ESPN. Well, all right. Well, I guess I'll buy it.
Right.
We shouldn't be the cable company selling a package of TV things. As a group of accountants, we should be selling very tailored, specific items, services to a client, and they should know what those services are and the price of it. Right. And it boggles my mind that as an industry, we don't do that. We just kind of one size fits all.
Because I think because we accept this notion, I think a lot of times there's a cynical notion that they can't understand what we're doing. So we're just going to sell them our involvement and then do what we do because they don't understand it anyway. And I think that's the part where you break down. The client has to understand what you're doing. You don't get to do that. You don't get to just say, I'm going to do work for the client. They're not going to really understand it. So, that thinking is just wrongheaded. Now I'm going to stop and I'm just going to say, hey, I'm sure a lot of my colleagues may take exception with what I've said here, or they totally disagree with it. And not for nothing, I may change my mind on what I said here someday too. So these are my thoughts as of this moment with some whiskey. But I mean, I've had these thoughts more than once. I think I've said similar things on prior shows, but yeah.
Well, it's hard for us. I mean, as accountants, when we see that savings that automation brought us, we want to fill it with whatever we can because we found some savings and my gosh, revenue needs to be the same. So we're going to use it different. And so I kind of see, even though it's silly, I do see how people fall into this kind of trap, Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it's the intuition. I think accountants kind of believe, we believe that most people think like we do, that they've kind of got a budget and they're only going to buy what they can afford for their various budget line items. And I mean, the intuition for me is that that's not how most people buy. People buy with emotion, and they will literally starve to buy the things they want to buy. So it's not really a fixed pie. It's not really the case that your clients are saying, oh, we've only got so much money for accounting. That's all we're going to spend for just accounting kind of thing. It depends. If you're offering them real value that they care about, they will spend more money.
Well, and I think it goes back to, the old adage, I guess, in the olden days was there's riches in the niches. But I think you need to realize that, like, you need to offer a targeted product or service to a targeted person that wants that service. Yes. And I think often we try to, it's the same thing with automation. Sometimes you're trying to fit a square hole in a round peg, and you got to find the people that want the square peg, and you have the square peg and they're willing to pay for it.
Yeah. And I'll tell the audience, I personally fall into that exact trap of there's things that I just think clients should need. And I like them. I'm particularly interested in them. And so I kind of run myself around in circles trying to get clients that will buy those things. And then I often have to discipline myself and sit back and say, hey, wait a minute. I need to stop and pay attention to what they actually say they want, or try to see if I can observe what they want. Because, it's not about doing what I think they need all the time. It's about being able to fill what wants that they have.
There is one other kind of more practical take on this whole article that I just wanted to share, because when I heard the title, I thought this was going to take a whole different direction, which is just that whole like angle of fear with automation. And whenever you're doing something that you've then, that how do you get past that issue of I've been doing something for 30 years and I need to have, I need to change how I do it, but I'm not comfortable changing. And so I just want to say there's a whole bunch of like tools that are built around trying to solve those problems. And so like whenever I'm trying to do any kind of automation of something, I try to utilize like test environments or like breakpoints in the process so that I can stop and see what happens. And it forces me to have a good understanding of what we're trying to do. And I think setting yourself up with those kind of systems so that you can change your methods, but still be able to actively test what you're doing is helpful, So just want to share another take on it.
Yeah, and I think that fear, which is, that is totally a different kind of path of this discussion. What I read into that fear as well is my experience of a lot of times, a lot of us aren't actually process thinkers. So we get things done, and we often can get them done correctly, but it's through this like series of steps where maybe we go like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, then 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? And when you go to try to, and you kind of know, if you have experience, you've been doing it that way for 10 or 20 years, and you kind of know, well, it's kind of a hokey system that I've got going on here, but it works, right? And so I think part of the fear involved there is that, hey, this thing that I'm doing, it's going to get exposed. And when I try to automate it, the problems with it are going to explode at scale, right? And I think that probably builds into some of the fear as well, is that a lot of people get their work done through things like that are not really process oriented per se. They just get it done. They don't have a process, and then that gets exposed or blows into a huge issue when you start trying to automate it.
Totally. I agree. And so I'm thinking there's just, steps and things you can do, approval processes and things you can try to build in that are geared at that. And a lot of people don't know to use those, but those things can help you feel better with that specific challenge. And there's a name for this. I'm blanking on the name. We'll think about it and put it in the notes of the podcast. I heard it in a management class, the paradox of routine. It's the paradox of routine. That's what it's called. Okay. And like you get into this routine, and so you feel like because you have a routine, that routine comforts you, and so you get comfortable and you keep doing that. But the paradox is that you often, that thing which comforts you is also what's holding you back from the better option, whatever that is in this case.
Right. Yeah.
That's what it's called, paradox of routine. And that's why I couldn't think of it, because who would think, who would say a name like paradox of routine?